Hey everyone, Rachel Jensen here, broker owner of Luna Realty Belize here on the beautiful island of Ambergris Caye. We are in the inbox today, which is when we answer questions that have been asked by folks like you about the real estate market or just Belize generally. So we are on question number 39. If you're new to this series, start at the beginning. A lot of great information that has already been shared. And of course, more information always coming your way. So today we were asked a question by Chris, and he said, this is my first purchase overseas. What should I know about the buying process in Belize compared to North America? Really great question, Chris. I'm glad that you asked that because a lot of times people jump right in without really understanding the differences or understanding what they're getting into. So it's best for you to be prepared. It's best for you to do your homework, know about some of these key differences so that your expectations are set. So then when something happens that's different, it doesn't throw you off, you are expecting it. So I'm going to go through the top 3 differences that I found. I purchased property in the States before. I purchased property throughout Latin America. And of course, Belize is where I call home and where we do most of our transactions. But these are the top 3 differences that I found between buying property in North America and buying property here in Belize. So the first one is about the physical title. And I do want to mention that it takes about 18 months for you to receive your physical title to your land once you paid for your property in full. Now, there's a closing process here. Typically, the closing due diligence period is about 2 months. During this time, you're getting a clear title check, you're getting an inventory if the property has furniture and whatnot, and you're going through that process of making sure that the property checks out. Now, once that all clears, then you will have a date for closing. And the closing date is not necessarily the date that you get the physical title. The closing date is when the transfer of the land happens from the seller to you, right? So at this point, this is when the agreed upon amount of money has transferred from the escrow account to the seller, and the transfer of the property is being made to you. Now, at this time, this is when all of the due diligence documents are received by the closing agent, and the closing agent on this closing date will submit your paperwork to the lands department. And once they submit all the documentation, typically about a week after closing, you'll receive from them what they call an instrument number. And the instrument number is proof that the paperwork has been submitted to the lands department. So this is really your safety net. Even though you don't have that physical title, this is how you know that your property is being sold to you, right? It's being processed by the lands department. There's no other back-end transaction, other sale that's happening, because the instrument number is what shows the legal process and what represents the legal process of that property being transferred from the seller into your name. And so Belize has recently gone digital with this as well. So you're able to take your instrument number, plug it into the lands department website, and see at what stage of the titling process it is. I say 18 months. I know some folks have gotten their title in as little as 12 months. Some have gotten it in as long as 2.5 years. It just takes time, but understand you have that instrument number. Sometimes it's referred to as an LRS number, and that really should be providing you with that peace of mind. I know I've had clients or people who've worked with other agents come to me and say, hey, can you help me get my title faster? And I'm like, well, do you have your LRS number or instrument number? They say yes. It's like, well, there's not really much more that we can do. And there's not really a need for you to have that physical piece of paper once you have that LRS number. Now, I do want to mention that if you want to sell your property before you get that physical title, that physical piece of paper, that is possible, just as long as your LRS number, your instrument number is shown as being cleared, right? It's not being suspended or held for any reason, then you are able to sell your property in the meantime. Number 2, this is a top difference. I talk about it quite a bit in this series, but it's seller financing. So in Belize, it is very, very difficult to get financing with a bank, a local bank here as a foreigner. So sellers who are looking for some advantage or have some time, they will offer seller financing. And if that is the case, if you're taking advantage of seller financing, I do want to mention a few things. I'm going to actually jump to the second point first. Is that the terms tend to be short, anywhere from 3 to 5 years. Typically, it's 50% down and interest rates north of 8%. And this is really important because if you're somebody who's thinking you're going to be getting a 30-year term, 20% down, that's not standard. I know there are some land developers or subdividers who are offering some sort of special discounts. Typically, if they're doing that, it's maybe within an IBC, and you do have to consider annual fees that are associated with it, tax forms that are associated with it. but it's not standard for the sellers to be offering the terms that we're used to in North America. I'm going to jump back up. Payments do tend to be made directly to the seller. So once you go through that due diligence period, that closing process, which takes about 2 months, you're going to be starting your monthly payments to the seller, or however you agreed to be paying that seller. So if you're doing monthly payments to the seller, it is just that. It is payments that are going to be made directly to the seller. Typically, when you're working with the closing agent or closing attorney, they're going to be putting together an agreement with you that says, you know, if you default after 30 or 60 days, the property will go back to the seller. So you do want to be diligent in making sure that you're sending money. Typically, a third party or an escrow account is not used because there are extra fees that are associated with it, but you will be paying directly to the seller. And then if you do want to pay more principal down or something along those lines, you would work directly with the seller on that. And then third point here, number 2, is that you won't close on the property until your property is paid off in full. I know this is something that some folks need to wrap their head around, but it is still your property, right? That's why you work with the closing agent, the closing attorney, to have that closing paperwork established, but you won't necessarily close in terms of a title transfer until that property is paid off in full. So when I say close there, I mean that title transfer. The title is not going to be transferred from the seller to you as the buyer until the property is paid off in full. And then third point I want to mention there is a closing agent. So I've mentioned a closing agent or closing attorney a few times here. I know in some states in the United States, you are required to have an attorney or closing agent. Others you aren't. Here, you aren't required to have one. I know some people who prefer to go through the closing process on their own because it saves, you know, a point or two when it comes to closing fees. However, I think it is extremely wise to be having a closing agent that you're working with. They're doing the due diligence for you to make sure that the property that you're buying is legitimate, that it has clean title, that it's clear and free of liens. Really important. In addition to that, they're going to be working with you on the seller due diligence documents, seller and buyers. They'll be working with both the seller and buyers to make sure that they have everything they need in order to process the closing paperwork, which is really important. If you are trying to work directly with a seller, it can get very difficult to do that. And then also, this person is just a third party representation. They offer another opinion. They are not bound or representing either side necessarily. It's third party, and it gives you that peace of mind. I think that really is important when you are buying property here in Belize. So even though I live here in Belize, I purchased property here in Belize, I always go through a closing agent because I want to make sure that the property that I'm purchasing is legitimate. And I don't necessarily have time to go to Belmopan for hours and sit there and wait at the lands department and do all of that. So let's let somebody else take care of it. So if you're new to owning real estate or looking at real estate here in Belize and you're thinking about spending time here in the country, please reach out to me, request this free e-copy of the Belize Lifestyle Guide. Even if you're only planning to spend some time here and maybe not make the move full time, tons of great information in here that really is important for you to know prior to coming down. We'll email a copy of this to you, info@Luna Realty Belize, info@lunarealtybelize.com. And even if you're not interested in this guide, but you are looking at properties here, feel free to reach out to us. We have a really great on-site team who wants to make sure that you are finding the property of your dreams. So reach out. Again, my name is Rachel Jensen. We look forward to hearing from you and have a fantastic day. Bye, everyone.